Welcome to Prog Rock Digital.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Prog Rock Digital. This is episode 4 of season 2. Now, before we get into our conversation with our special guest for today, I wanted to make you aware that we have ranked in the top 25 progressive rock podcasts on the internet. Thanks to FeedSpot for the data and analysis. I have attached a link in the notes section from wherever you download and stream this episode. Be sure to click on the link. You will be presented with a listing of 25 progressive rock podcasts from around the world. We are currently ranked in at number 21. Thank you very much for downloading and streaming. Thank you for visiting progrockdigital.com. Now, with regards to our conversation today, we are chatting with a very good friend of mine, direct from Connecticut in the US, IOANNIS. Now, IOANNIS is the man that's, the man behind the artwork connected to Fate's Warning and the A Pleasant Shade of Grey album. We're chatting about the environment that IOANNIS worked in. We're chatting about the inspiration, the way in which he procured some of the ideas and, photos that went into the front cover art. We chat about all things connected to the artwork, how, what, and why. We're actually breaking this episode down into 2 segments. Why? Well, because we cover off on a lot of detail, and, I think it's very important that I do not edit out anything, basically, because IOANNIS has a lot to say. Great guy. I have a lot of respect for IOANNIS. And as I said, we've broken this down into 2 episodes or 2 segments. The second segment to come in a few weeks from now. Enjoy and thank you. Paris of Troy out to Ludos Records. Their debut single, Torn Away. Australian prog at its best. Available for download and stream on all digital platforms.
Torn away. Hello, this is Mick Box of Uriah Heep, and you're listening to Prog Rock Digital.
I'll give you a little bit of a context also, and it's great to be back on the show, and just it's just a great show that you have, and definitely always enjoy being a part of it. Obviously, on a previous show, we had talked about how I met and how we worked together and so on. So after Awaken the Guardian had occurred, we were basically just burnt out, all of us. I mean, it was such an excruciating project to do for simple reason that it was, there was just so much pressure on them at the time. Spectre Within had become was very successful. And they had become sort of the premier act for Metal Blade at that time. And, Brian Slagle was basically, betting the farm on this one. And in the middle of all that, they also changed guitar players. If you remember, Frank Oresti came on board. And in this situation, so it wasn't as loose as it was for Spectre Within. Where they could make mistakes and they had fun and they enjoyed it. This one, though, was very professional. And there was a lot riding on it because it was a financial investment by Brian Slagle, which was important, involved. There were a lot of people actually involved in that project. And also Brian had just done a deal with Enigma. We had done a deal with Capitol Records. Now Capitol Records was coming on board, right, for distribution and everything. For the stakes were up there. And Enigma was already we're going from an obscure little label that launched to that year enjoying prosperity because the act that they signed, Poison, took off like a rocket. and Capitol Records jumped in. So you had all these moving pieces going on. So you had that happening, management change. They had to go to Los Angeles to record the album. There were discussions about who was going to produce it. As a matter of fact, at the time, my brother was the band's manager, became the band's manager, and he was handling that because they didn't have a manager prior to that. And my brother got a friend of mine that I work with, and this will be a major reference to the band. And you can look at these people's names. They're still on the credits. He got Paul O'Neill involved, and Paul O'Neill was the guy who put together Sabotage, and later that band morphed into Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Paul seriously considered producing the album, and he even talked about bringing Michael Schenker on board to do some guitar parts. I mean, this is how nuts this whole thing was getting. And and for me, I was in the middle of 2 other record covers, but I was still sort of, doing it on the side. I was still going to school, and doing this stuff. And all of a sudden, again, it wasn't as free-flowing as before. There was just a lot of pressure. And the first few covers that I did just sucked. They just didn't look right. I mean, there's people who have them, they think they're phenomenal, but it just didn't connect. It just wasn't right. There was even a discussion where at one point, we were running so much out of time and panicking that Brian considered, like, listen, if you can't do it, I maybe I'll get somebody to finish the cover or to do the artwork. I mean, it was that insane. So it wasn't a pleasurable experience, but the time was all said and done. It was an incredible piece of work. I mean, we really bled for that project. I was burnt out on it. They were burnt out on this stuff, and it went on. And actually, the guy that I hired to do the photography, my good friend, Mick Rock, who's done the covers for Queen and David Bowie and so on. And Mick said, hey, I'll pitch in, I'll help out. And he did the photography for the photo session for the record album. They came back, and I was already starting my own agency. I was involved in 3 or 4 other projects. And I just didn't really want to go back to doing the next one that came, which was No Exit. And Mick Rock jumped in and said, okay, I'll just do it. And he did one of Jim's ideas. And the only connection to me is Brian came to me and said, I want to use the logo. So can I pay you for the right to use the logo? And I sold the Fates Warning logo to him, the one that's used on Awaken the Guardian. So everything just kind of splintered. This is what, 87 now, 88 we're talking, right? That came out in 86. And so I went on. A couple of years later, my career had, blossomed and moved on. So the next prog act that I did at the time was Dream Theater. That was in 1989. And they were big fans of Fates Warning. They would show up at the shows. I don't know if you guys, how many people know that, right? I mean, they're really good friends. That's why you've seen Portnoy playing with them, and they, and so on. They idolized Fates Warning. And if you listen to the first Dream Theater album, you can see where, the comparisons, So we fast forward now. So I hadn't seen, so after Mick Rock, they got, then John, and then of course what happened is right in the middle or right after the first leg of the tour, I forgot to mention that, it's the biggest change. Right after the first leg of the tour, John Arch decided he just didn't want to tour. He just didn't want to be away from his family. He just didn't want to do that. And of course, back in those days, that type of a band, they have to tour. If you can't tour, what's the point? It was a different world. So now they had in comes Ray into the picture, and that new beginnings. They got management. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Megadeth's manager, and they, I know they loved the Rush. So the guy who came into the picture to do their design work, which made sense to me because they had Rush's producer now working for them, Terry Brown, who did 2112 and A Farewell to Kings and all that. He became their producer. And then naturally, because there was some money there, and now Metal Blade was affiliated with Warner Brothers and there was more money, they went in and got Rush's album cover designer, Hugh Syme, who's a brilliant designer. And he's the one who did Parallels with them, those two albums. And there was a lot of money involved in that, you know, the videos and so on and so that. And it's so, actually, they sold well, but not the way the music industry wants. It's so funny. Today, if you sell like 10,000 CDs, they're doing somersaults. Back in those days, if you sold under 250,000 CDs, you're probably going to lose your deal. There was that kind of pressure, you know. You know, they never went gold, and Lord knows they never went platinum. They were not that kind of band, you know. And they sold, but not, they were good. It's independent, but they didn't sell that well. So they changed managers back and forth. So now we fast forward into the 90s, and I think it was 92 or 93, something like that. I'm at a show, Guess a Dream Theater, and of course there's the guys. They're there. You know, there's Jim, and I hadn't seen him in a while. You know, we ran into each other. It was like, you know, we were like brothers. You know, and it was just a lot of mutual respect for each other. And it was like, man, how you doing? You know, and we started to talk, and it was really, really cool. And it was just great to reminisce and so on. And, you know, the years now had passed, and, you know, the good memories were left, you know, as opposed to, oh, do you remember that time you screwed up, you know, whatever, you know, and whatnot, you know? And so, you know, and he was always very tight with my brother, George, and so on. So we fast forward to that album, and, you know, and he calls George, and he's talking to him about something or other, my brother, and goes, hey, listen, you know, he calls me Yo, you know, short for IOANNIS. So he goes, hey, Yo, this one's, you know, he says, hey, well, Yo, does Yo want to do our album cover? He said, but it can't be, you know, like, you know, it can't look, you know, like Awaken the Guardian, because we're not that type of band anymore, you know. And George goes, no, have you seen some of the stuff we've been doing, you know, because, you know, IOANNIS does all kinds of styles of artwork now, not just, you know, fantasy paintings is what I was doing, basically, because that's all I knew how to do back in the 80s, in the middle 80s. And Jim looked at some of the ideas. He's like, wow, these are great. And, you know, he looked at some of the, you know, new covers I had done. He goes, yeah. He goes, you know, I have a tight budget, but, you know, I'm like, I don't care about that. I said, let's just do what we got to do. And he said, yeah, okay. He goes, we're working on this album. You want to come up to the studio and check it out, see what you hear, you know? And they're recording with Terry Brown, and they were. It was called a Carriage House, I believe, the place. And it was up only about 25 minutes away from me, south towards New York City, close to New York City. And that's how it started, man. And I went there, you know, but, you know, now a few things that happened personally to me. I had gotten married, you know, and I had a little daughter on her way. And identically, Jim had gotten married, and he had a little daughter. And so I went up to play, and I remember you know, Ray was there, and it was you know, went up and, you know, after I closed the office, you know, our offices. So I took a ride up about maybe 6, 7 o'clock at night. I was up there. I think it was early fall or spring. It wasn't summertime, and it wasn't winter or something like that. I think it was fall, it was spring. And I just remember distinctly looking at the sunset, and there was like a mood there and everything, just kind of put me into this frame of mind. So I walk in, and Jim is playing some on the guitar, and he's recording a certain track. And I just walked in, I just sat in the chair, and Jim goes, "Hey, let me just finish this part and we'll talk." And he goes and he plays, and I hear this, maybe 3 minutes of music. And I know I know the tracks are in sequences, like, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, the way they did it. I can't remember the exact part, but I can, maybe I can, email it to you later, or whatever. But it's a piece of music, and it just starts simply with a guitar riff. It's very Floydish. It's like, ba-da-da-bum-bum, he just played it. But what it sounded like to me was a drop of water falling, like rainwater, like when it falls and you're just watching a puddle and it occurs, like you see a drop of water and falls to a puddle and it opens, and you watch the puddle form. And I just saw that happening in my mind in very slow motion. And to me, what he was playing sounded like the perfect soundtrack to that image, right? And from that thing, the way it hit me, and that's the way I always work, is how I started to derive the ideas for the graphics. So, the more I heard the rest of the song, there weren't even lyrics to it yet, the more that type of mood, hit me in my mind, right? No, it was winter. It was late winter. I think it was February. That's when it was, because I just remembered something. And so Jim started talking to me. This guy, he goes, how are you going to approach this? And I said, I don't know. I said, what's the title going to be? And when he told me the title, I wasn't surprised, because it just perfectly fit the music that I heard. He's a big fan of Roger Waters, and he's a big fan of Pink Floyd, and it was dark, but not like dark in a devilish way or something, like Black Sabbath or something. It was just a dark overtone, very moody, very melancholic. And it would just remind me of, solitude, self-reflection, those kind of things. So I said to him, I'm not exactly sure what the cover is going to be. I said, I'll come up with something. But I said, I'm just seeing a variety of images. And I think the way we should do this is just a series of images, like as though they're just snapshots from a movie, some imaginary movie. Because I'm envisioning your music as a soundtrack to these images. So, if you see a shot of a window pane with, water on it on a rainy day, and you listen to a piece of music and you're focusing in on, the raindrops on the window pane or something like that. I was starting to describe it to him, and he's like, yeah, I like where your head's going. And I said, like an overall blue tint, I'm thinking, right, on everything. So create a mood. And he said, yeah. He goes, yeah. He goes, real clean font for the name Fates Warning. I don't want a logo, I said. I just want something elegant, something simple.
Paris of Troy out through Ludos Records, their debut single, Torn Away. Australian prog at its best. Available for download and stream on all digital platforms.
How the images came about. I started searching where to find this stuff. And on weekends, I would take rides. I still do. I mean, that's like my favorite way to unwind is I get in my car and I throw in some of my favorite music that I want to listen to. And I just get lost, like driving up the coast of New England, out in the deep forests, really isolated places where there's waterfalls, moody looking places and so on, and I'll play the appropriate soundtrack. It puts me like almost like in a Zen type of state. And that's when I get a lot of images in my head about things. And I'll jot them down on a piece of paper, or I'll take a photograph that will remind me of something. And that I'm going to look at it at some other point in my life. And that's just an experimentation. There's places. A lot of my record covers have used backgrounds or scenery up here in New England. I remember for FWX, that's where I got the landscape from for Fate's Warning, that I did. I remember there's like a Buddhist temple, an actual Buddhist temple, out in the middle of the forests here in New England, and you go to it, and it's like, they're never ever there. But it looks like a miniature Tibet the guy has created in the middle of the forest, and you can get lost in there. And you swear, if somebody hits you over the head and you woke up, you think you're in Tibet somewhere until you realize after 5 minutes that you're actually in Connecticut, but you're, somewhere. And there's just these really cool places. There's this place where these like nuns, Benedict nuns live, which they're nuns, they cannot come in contact with any men. But the place that they live is just really bizarre. It looks like the 1600s, the buildings and everything. And they actually know me, and they allowed me to walk through the back of the area and look at it. I took all these photographs and very Gothic stuff, that I could, and for me, I just keep accumulating all these images and things that I can use. So, with Fate's Warning, I had, for my honeymoon, I had gone with my wife, I went to New Orleans. And late at night, I was walking through New Orleans, and I just took photographs. It was raining, and I took a photograph of puddles of water on the cobblestone streets. And that set the background for the artwork. And as a matter of fact, one of the shots of New Orleans I used later for the cover of the band, the Flower Kings. The title of the album is called Rainmaker. And that's New Orleans, you could tell. It's a black and white shot. And then I colored it and airbrushed it, and that's how I give it that moody look. And that could easily be a Fate's Warning cover, if you look at that. The Flower Kings cover, it could easily fit as a Fate's Warning cover. But they were both done in the same period, actually. So I drive those. Then I was walking through the street, and I just look at the streets, and the people walking by, and it's freezing cold. You know how your breath, comes out of your mouth, and you can freeze it. So it was late at night, and as they were walking, there's a face, and the breath's coming out of her mouth, and the cars are zipping by, and I caught that, and I caught it as a streak of light coming in, and that's one of the images on the cover. About the only one that was specific, something that wasn't ambiguous, is Jim said, "Hey, what do you think about the idea of a brain with an umbrella over it, to cover it from the rain?" And I'm like, that actually sounds like really cool. The first thing in my mind went to is Hemispheres, by Rush. No, that's probably where you got the idea from. You have the floating brains and you have people on it. Jim said, but Jim's twist was putting an umbrella over the brain, and he said, okay, that can really look weird. It can look really cool. I said, no, I think it can make it look cool. So they did that. That sort of became like the unofficial logo for the album, kind of. The and so on. But I had a whole bunch of them I made, but I had a lot of them. But we didn't have enough time to print them in color or in black and white, and the budget wasn't there. And I felt kind of disappointed because I wasn't able to do all the things I wanted to do. The main picture, that's the cover, was we had gone to a flea market. This guy sold me I always look for odd things. I collect like old postcards, old drawings. And the guy brought me, I said, what are those? And I saw these little black ones. He goes, oh, these are some old photographs. And I said, what are they exactly? And they were like maybe 50 or 60 of them. And they were tiny. They were 3 by 4 inches, but they were very, very old. And they had writing in the back of them. And it was his grandfather's trip to China in 1906. So there were images in there that just look mind-boggling, weird, and surreal because it's a world that just doesn't exist. I mean, that was China before Mao or anything. That was like, before the revolution, And there's a specific shot that became a strong image. It's a shot of a guy, that's actually his grandfather, standing in front of this eye artwork. I mean, I don't know if you're looking at the package, but you could see it. That in itself, for a minute there, we were probably going to use that as the cover. But we went from another shot where his grandfather was sitting in the dark at his library, just reading. And the way the guy looked, it was that look, that early 19th century look, English look that fit the mood, because it was that sense of solitude that you get from listening to the album.